On a humid August morning, the sleepy border town of Laredo, Texas stirred to life. The Rio Grande carried a thick fog, and with it came the hushed movements of people who lived in its shadows. Among them was Miguel Ortega, a seasoned smuggler with a reputation for silence and precision. He had slipped across borders, ferried contraband through checkpoints, and bribed his way past sharp-eyed officers more times than he could count. But that morning, as he readied his small white pickup truck stacked with wooden crates, he couldn't have imagined that his greatest threat wasn't the cameras, the dogs, or the agents, but a parrot with a gift for mimicry. Miguel's operation was simple: exotic pets, rare birds, and animals in high demand for wealthy collectors in Miami and Los Angeles. Hidden among legal cargo, he transported them with meticulous planning. The crates were marked farm produce and filled with hay to muffle sound. Inside, parrots and macaws sat in silence, trained, or so he thought, to stay quiet during the tense border checks. Miguel trusted his birds more than his associates. They couldn't betray him. Yet inside one crate was Paco, a green-feathered parrot with a mischievous streak. Unlike the others, Paco loved to mimic human voices, especially phrases he overheard around Miguel's compound. Phrases no smuggler would ever want repeated. The morning was already strange. Miguel's cousin, who usually accompanied him, had called in sick. So, Miguel drove alone, whistling nervously. He told himself it would be just another crossing. A short exchange with customs, a nod, a wave, and then back on the highway. But Paco had other plans. As the truck approached the checkpoint, the bird stirred, rustling in the crate. Miguel, too focused on the line of cars ahead, didn't notice the sound at first. The parrot, restless and curious, tilted its head, listening to the hum of engines and snippets of conversation filtering in through the truck's cracked window. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer was a veteran of 20 years. Officer Daniels had a reputation for reading drivers like open books. He leaned toward Miguel's truck with practiced calm. "Morning. What do you got today?" Miguel's heart raced, but his voice was smooth. "Just farm goods. Produce, hay, feed." Daniels nodded, scanning the crates. Then, in the stillness, it happened. Paco's sharp voice rang out from inside the truck bed. "La policia. Escond la cocaína." The police. Hide the cocaine. Daniels froze. Miguel's blood turned cold. That wasn't a random squawk. It was fluent Spanish, and it sounded incriminating. The silence that followed felt eternal. Daniels raised an eyebrow, peering over Miguel's shoulder. "What was that?" Miguel forced a laugh, waving his hand. "Parrots, you know. They repeat anything they hear. Dumb bird doesn't know what he's saying." But Paco wasn't done. With impeccable timing, the parrot repeated the phrase louder, then added a new one it had learned around the smuggler's crew. "Rapido, carga la droga." Quick, load the drugs. The officer's expression shifted from curiosity to suspicion. Suddenly, the crates marked farm produce didn't look so ordinary anymore. Daniels tapped the back of the truck with his flashlight. "Step out of the vehicle." Miguel swallowed hard, his palms sweaty. He knew the parrot's performance had put him on thin ice. The other vehicles in line honked impatiently, but Daniels signaled for backup. Another officer approached. The parrots inside the crate stirred, but Paco remained the star of the show, croaking and repeating incriminating lines. To Daniels, it sounded rehearsed. To Miguel, it was a nightmare unraveling in real time. He had smuggled rare animals for years, but never had one turned into a witness against him. Miguel's mind raced for an excuse. "Listen, officer, you can't take that bird seriously. It's just repeating nonsense it heard on the TV. My nephew likes crime shows." Daniels wasn't convinced. He had heard excuses of every variety, but never one involving a talking parrot incriminating its owner. He called for a canine unit. Miguel's chest tightened. He knew if the dogs caught scent of anything unusual, it was over. Paco, sensing the tension, squawked another phrase. "Cor, la migra viena." "Run, run, immigration is coming." Daniels smirked. "Sir, I think we've heard enough." The dogs sniffed around the crates, their handlers tugging at leashes. Miguel tried to remain calm, leaning against his truck casually, but sweat rolled down his temples. The animals inside were legitimate exotics. No drugs this time, but the smuggling of endangered species was just as serious. Miguel's plan had been airtight. Forged documents, crates marked with farm logos, even invoices printed with barcodes. What he hadn't planned for was a parrot with perfect comedic timing. Paco screeched again, this time in English, "Police! Open the box! Police! Open the box!" The officers exchanged knowing glances. Daniels ordered the crates to be unloaded. One by one, the wooden boxes were pried open, revealing exotic parrots, toucans, and cockatoos blinking in the daylight. Some flapped their wings nervously, others remained still. Miguel kept muttering under his breath, insisting the birds were part of a legal shipment. But the paperwork began to unravel under scrutiny. Barcodes didn't scan properly. Signatures didn't match. And then, Paco gave the final blow. Mimicking Miguel's own voice, he said, "Tranquilo, Paco. Esta vez no nos atraparán. Relax, Paco. This time they won't catch us." The officers' faces hardened. That wasn't TV chatter. That was personal. The realization hit Miguel like a sledgehammer. His own parrot had just quoted him verbatim. Weeks ago, before a late-night run, he had jokingly reassured Paco with those exact words. Now, repeated in broad daylight, they sounded like a confession. Daniels stepped closer. "Sir, you're under arrest for wildlife trafficking and attempted smuggling." Miguel's knees weakened, but before he could protest, cuffs clicked around his wrists. The parrots squawked chaotically as agents cataloged them. Paco, satisfied with the attention, crooned one last line, this time almost playfully, "Gotcha!" The officers laughed despite themselves. The smuggler had been tripped up by a bird song. News of the bizarre arrest spread like wildfire. By evening, local stations were broadcasting headlines. "Smuggler betrayed by talking parrot at border." The story had everything: crime, comedy, and a feathered informant. Social media exploded with memes, dubbing Paco the feathered snitch and the narc parrot. But behind the viral headlines, authorities uncovered something darker. Miguel wasn't just a small-time smuggler. His name was linked to a network trafficking exotic wildlife across multiple states. Paco's chatter had accidentally cracked open an operation bigger than anyone realized. Agents seized Miguel's phone, uncovering encrypted messages with buyers in Florida, Texas, and even overseas. The birds he carried were only a fraction of what had been moved. Some species were endangered, their sale strictly prohibited under international law. What had started as a comedic border incident now unfolded into a federal investigation. The irony was too sharp to ignore. Without Paco's mimicry, Miguel might have slipped through again. Instead, the parrot's mimicry forced a closer look, and that closer look revealed an empire built on feathers, claws, and cages. In the detention center, Miguel sat in disbelief. His lawyer tried to frame the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding, but the parrot's recordings were damning. Yes, agents had actually begun taping Paco's phrases, treating them like unintentional testimony. The legal debate raged. Could a bird's mimicry be considered evidence? Prosecutors didn't need to prove the parrot knew what it was saying, only that Miguel had said those words and the parrot had accurately repeated them. For once, Miguel was being undone not by rival smugglers or undercover agents, but by his own loose talk around a feathered companion. The case attracted national attention. Late-night hosts joked about police parrots and undercover macaws. Animal rights groups seized the spotlight, highlighting the cruelty of wildlife smuggling. Videos of confiscated parrots went viral, their bright feathers and curious eyes stirring public sympathy. But the star remained Paco. Reporters clamored for a glimpse of the bird. Agents kept him in a secure facility, half as evidence and half to protect him. Witness protection for a parrot, one commentator quipped. Miguel, meanwhile, stewed in his cell, cursing the bird that had become both internet sensation and state's witness. Behind the comedy, though, lay tragedy. Some of the parrots seized from Miguel's shipment were sick, dehydrated, or injured from cramped travel conditions. Wildlife experts worked around the clock to rehabilitate them. Each bird represented not just a victim of Miguel's smuggling but part of a vanishing ecosystem. The case reignited calls for stricter penalties on wildlife trafficking. If a parrot can expose this, one activist said, imagine what goes unseen every day. Paco had sparked more than laughter. He had ignited a conversation America had long avoided. Miguel's defense strategy grew desperate. His lawyer argued that Paco's words were inadmissible, claiming birds lacked intent or reliability. The courtroom erupted in laughter more than once when Paco was mentioned in testimony. The judge, though, wasn't laughing. Documents, bank records, and digital trails painted a damning picture. Paco wasn't the only evidence. He was just the most colorful. Still, prosecutors played recordings of Paco squawking the incriminating phrases. Jurors stifled chuckles. Miguel buried his face in his hands. It was a trial unlike any other. Experts were brought in to testify. Ornithologists explained that parrots had no comprehension of meaning but astonishing recall of sound. Paco's mimicry was proof that Miguel had spoken those words in his presence. Border agents testified about the discovery of forged documents and the endangered species hidden in crates. Piece by piece, the prosecution dismantled Miguel's empire. And through it all, Paco's voice echoed like a chorus in the background. A bird unintentionally haunting the man who had once owned him. The verdict was swift. Guilty on multiple counts. Wildlife trafficking, smuggling, and fraud. Miguel faced years in federal prison. As the sentence was read, Paco sat in a secure aviary hundreds of miles away, blissfully unaware of his role in the courtroom drama. For Miguel, it was a bitter ending. For Paco, it was just another day of singing. Outside, cameras flashed as activists declared victory. The smuggler had been tripped up not by human error, but by a parrot song, and the world would not forget it. After the trial, debates flared across the nation. Should parrots like Paco be trained and used by law enforcement? Was it ethical to treat animal mimicry as evidence? Some joked about creating a parrot task force, while others warned of blurred legal lines. Yet one truth was undeniable. Paco had exposed a major smuggling ring. He had reminded everyone, accidentally, that crime often collapses not from elaborate sting operations but from the smallest, strangest cracks. In this case, the crack had feathers, a curved beak, and a voice. Months later, Paco found a new home, not with collectors or smugglers, but in a wildlife sanctuary where his talents entertained visitors. Children laughed as Paco repeated his famous lines, though carefully edited versions. No incriminating Spanish commands, just playful chatter. Miguel languished in prison, his empire dismantled, his name forever tied to the bird who had betrayed him. The story remained a legend in border towns and a cautionary tale in criminal circles. In the end, the smuggler had been undone not by men or machines, but by the song of a parrot that refused to stay silent. The trial had been scheduled in record time. The evidence was overwhelming, yet the defense was grasping at straws. Franklin's lawyers filed motion after motion, arguing that the parrot's mimicry was unreliable, that the surveillance footage had been tampered with, and that their client had been coerced into confession. But every time, the prosecution countered with facts, with audio recordings, with forensic analysis. Outside the courthouse, the parrot itself had become a media celebrity. News crews wanted to film the singing bird who brought down a smuggler. To everyone's surprise, the parrot seemed to bask in the attention, whistling tunes as cameras rolled. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Jurors leaned forward in their seats when the prosecution presented the star piece of evidence, the recording of the parrot's uncanny mimicry. The jury heard the bird repeat phrases Franklin had once shouted at his accomplices. Lines like, "Hide the bag," and "Get moving," all delivered in perfect imitation of his gruff tone. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Franklin clenched his jaw, his eyes burning with humiliation. To be undone not by undercover cops or high-tech surveillance, but by a bird that refused to stop singing. There was bitter irony in it, and he knew it. Franklin tried one last desperate tactic. During his testimony, he claimed he'd been framed. He insisted the parrot was trained by police to mimic his voice. "You can make parrots say anything," he barked, pounding the witness stand. But the prosecution calmly countered with expert testimony. An avian behaviorist explained how parrots learned phrases through exposure, not scripted training. The timing was damning. The parrot had been seized directly from Franklin's property during his arrest. The jurors exchanged knowing looks. The more Franklin argued, the deeper he dug his own grave. The parrot had not been scripted. It had simply repeated what it had heard. Meanwhile, Franklin's accomplices had already turned against him. Facing their own charges, they struck plea deals, spilling details of the smuggling operation. They confirmed that Franklin used his rural warehouse to store contraband, that he gave orders with sharp, threatening commands. The same commands now echoing from the parrot's beak. One accomplice even laughed bitterly on the stand. "That bird never shut up," he said. "It was always in the corner," repeating Frankie's words. "We joked about it. None of us thought it'd be the reason we'd end up here." The courtroom chuckled, but Franklin's face remained a mask of rage. As the trial dragged on, Franklin's paranoia deepened. Shackled in the defendant's chair, he glared at the parrot whenever its name was mentioned, as if the creature were a human witness testifying against him. He muttered under his breath about traitors and snitches, words that only added to the prosecution's portrayal of him as ruthless and unrepentant. His legal team begged him to stay calm, but Franklin was unraveling. He was no longer the calculating smuggler who once ran an efficient network. He was a man betrayed by his own arrogance, and by a feathered companion who remembered too much. The verdict was swift. After only a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned, guilty on all counts. The judge's gavel struck with finality, and Franklin's shoulders slumped for the first time. The smuggler who had eluded authorities for years was now undone by a bird's song. Reporters flooded outside the courthouse, broadcasting headlines that seemed surreal. "Parrot helps convict smuggler. Feathered witness steals spotlight in courtroom drama." Franklin was led away in handcuffs, his once proud stride broken into a shuffle. But even as he was escorted out, the parrot's recorded voice echoed in the courtroom, mocking him with every word. In prison, Franklin replayed his downfall over and over. He couldn't escape it. The story followed him inside. Guards snickered. Fellow inmates teased him mercilessly. "Hey, Frankie," one jeered. "Your bird gonna sing today?" Franklin lashed out more than once, earning solitary confinement. He wrote bitter letters to his lawyer, ranting about conspiracies, about being framed by a bird. But the world outside moved on, embracing the story as both darkly comic and deeply ironic. The smuggler's empire had collapsed, his reputation destroyed, and the parrot's whistle had become a symbol of poetic justice. The parrot, meanwhile, was given a new home. Authorities didn't want the bird kept as mere evidence forever. Instead, it was rehomed with a local wildlife sanctuary. Visitors flocked there, eager to hear the famous singing parrot. Children laughed when the bird repeated its eerie phrases. Some even claimed the parrot had picked up new lines, imitating reporters' voices or mimicking the sound of camera shutters. What had once been Franklin's intimidating pet was now a star attraction, admired not for loyalty but for truth-telling. The bird had, in its own strange way, become a hero. The case sparked heated debates across the country. Could animal mimicry really be used in court? Legal scholars argued back and forth. Some worried it set a dangerous precedent. Others said the parrot was not a witness, but simply corroborating evidence, like an accidental recording. The public, however, cared little for the legal technicalities. They were captivated by the story's bizarre charm. Podcasts dissected every detail. Late-night comedians joked about it. True crime channels turned it into mini-documentaries. The smuggler had wanted power and secrecy, but in the end, he was famous for all the wrong reasons. For investigators, the case was a reminder that no detail was too small. The parrot had not been part of their original plan. It was a detail they could have ignored, an animal they might have dismissed. But by paying attention, they'd uncovered a piece of evidence that sealed the conviction. The lead detective later told an interviewer, "We chase patterns, clues, testimony. But sometimes, justice comes from the unlikeliest sources. In this case, it came with feathers and a tune." His words resonated. The story became not just about one man's downfall, but about the unpredictable ways truth surfaces. Years later, Franklin sat in a cold prison library, thumbing through a newspaper article about himself. The Parrot story had resurfaced in a retrospective about the strangest criminal cases of the decade. His jaw clenched as he read the mocking tone, the way his name was forever tied to the bird. The laugh that cost him his freedom, one headline said, playing off the bird's mimicry of Franklin's laughter. He threw the paper down, but he couldn't throw away the legacy. He would always be remembered not as a mastermind smuggler, but as the man undone by a parrot. Meanwhile, the parrot thrived. The sanctuary reported it lived a long, healthy life, beloved by visitors. It had learned to whistle entire melodies, even mimicking snippets of news anchors announcing Franklin's conviction. Tourists traveled from other states just to hear it. To them, the bird was more than entertainment. It was proof that fate could twist in the strangest ways, that arrogance could be shattered by the smallest, most unexpected witness. The parrot never knew its role in human justice, of course, but its song carried a kind of legend now, one that outlived Franklin's empire. The story entered folklore. In small towns, parents told children the tale of the smuggler and the parrot, a modern-day fable about greed and betrayal. Schools used it as a quirky case study in law classes. Writers adapted it into novels and television scripts. The details shifted with each retelling, but the essence remained. A criminal thought he was untouchable, until a parrot repeated the truth he tried to hide. The legend made people chuckle, but it also carried a moral. Secrets have a way of slipping out, and sometimes, the walls that guard them have wings. Franklin's family struggled under the weight of his legacy. His estranged daughter, who had long resented his criminal life, publicly spoke out. "My father thought he could outsmart the world," she told a journalist. But he couldn't even outsmart his own pet. Her words struck a chord with readers. They painted a portrait of a man consumed by pride, blind to the vulnerability in his own home. For her, the parrot wasn't just a bird. It was justice personified, a reminder that Franklin's arrogance had consequences that extended beyond himself. As the years passed, the fascination never fully died. Documentaries revisited the case, blending dramatic reenactments with real footage. Viewers were hooked all over again by the absurdity and irony of it. Podcasts revisited Franklin's smuggling network, detailing how close he had come to slipping away, until his feathered companion betrayed him. Some framed it as comedy, others as tragedy. But all agreed, it was unforgettable. The smuggler had thought he controlled everything. But in the end, the soundtrack of his empire was the very song that condemned him. One prison guard later recalled a haunting memory. Late at night, he heard Franklin muttering in his cell. Sometimes, the man wasn't cursing or ranting. Sometimes, he was softly whistling the very tune his parrot had once repeated. It was eerie, as if Franklin couldn't escape the echo of his downfall. Even in solitude, the bird's song lived on in his mind. The guard described it as a man haunted not by ghosts, but by a melody. That image stuck with many who heard it, adding another layer of strange poetry to the case. By the time Franklin's sentence neared its end, he was an old man. The once fearsome smuggler shuffled slowly through prison corridors, his name long since eclipsed by the birds. He applied for parole, but the board denied him, citing his lack of remorse. "I was betrayed," he muttered during the hearing, still obsessed with the parrot. The officials exchanged glances. This was not a man who had accepted his crimes. This was someone still trying to rewrite the story. And so, his years stretched on. The parrot, by contrast, lived free until its natural end. When news broke of its passing, obituaries flooded the internet. "The parrot who sang the truth has died," one headline declared. People who had never met the bird left tributes online. To them, it symbolized more than a quirky story. It symbolized justice, irony, and the strange ways fate works. Its absence was felt, but its legend endured. Even in death, the parrot had a stronger legacy than the man it had inadvertently destroyed. When Franklin finally passed away in prison, his death made the news too, but the tone was starkly different. Articles paired his obituary with reminders of the case. His name was inseparable from the parrot's. One writer put it bluntly. He wanted to be remembered as a kingpin. Instead, he'll forever be remembered as the smuggler outwitted by his own bird. The world had moved on, but the irony never dulled. Franklin's empire was dust. The parrot song lived on in memory. And so, the story closed with a strange symmetry. A man who had built his life on secrecy was undone by a creature incapable of lying. A smuggler who believed himself untouchable was tripped up by a simple song. The case became legend, not because of its scale, but because of its absurdity. And in that legend lies a truth. Justice doesn't always come from the obvious places. Sometimes, it comes on wings. Sometimes, it comes with feathers. And sometimes, it sings.